Can I begin?
Yes.
Lovely. Okay. Welcome everyone to the licensing panel virtual meeting this morning. This is our new way of working for the time being. So it is being webcast. Please bear with us. It is the first time we're getting used to this software and this platform. So, just bear with us. So first of all, I'd like to start by asking everyone to introduce themselves. I will start. My name's Councillor Amanda Pinnock. I'm the chair of the panel, and then we'll move to the panel members if they can introduce themselves.
Yeah. Good morning.
Yes,
I am Councillor Karen Allison.
And good morning. I am Councillor Paola Davis.
Okay, can we move to the officers?
Good morning. It's Russell Williams, Group Leader for Licensing.
I'm David Stickley. I'm the solicitor here to advise the panel should they need any legal advice.
Thank you. And then the applicant, Ms. Varga.
Good morning. My name is Tamara Waga.
Thank you. And your representative?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Nick Stamper. I'm a licensing consultant from the licensing guys down in Hereford.
Thank you. And we have one objector, member of the public, Mrs. Gilmore.
Gilmore.
Thank you. And then we have two ward councillors. Could you identify yourselves, please? Two ward councillors who are objectors today. Councillor Ulla, Councillor Patterson.
Hello, I'm Councillor Carol Patterson, ward member for Greenhead Board, councillor for Greenhead Board.
Thank you. And do we have Councillor Ulla? No. Okay. So we'll move on then. So just to confirm, this meeting today, this virtual meeting, is being webcast and recorded. Okay, and I'll start by going through the agenda. The first agenda item is minutes of the previous meeting. My two panelists who are here today were also at that meeting on the 23rd of March, 2020. Can we approve those minutes?
Yeah.
Councillor Davies?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, the second agenda item is conflict of any interest to declare. Councillor Allison, do you have any interest to declare?
No, nothing.
Councillor Davies?
No, none from me.
Lovely. Okay, the next agenda item is admissions of the public. We know this meeting is being webcast. There's no deputations or petitions that I'm aware of.
No, none received, Chair.
Thank you. And then the next item's public question time. I'm not aware of any written questions that have been put forward. Can you confirm?
None received. Yeah, none received.
Lovely. So we'll go straight into the application now. And it's an application for grant of a premises licence for Dubai stores situated at 1 to 3 Willow Lane, Hill House, Huddersfield.
Thank you,
So
Chair.
we'll start. So we'll begin by having some information from the licensing officer, please. Russell Williams, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, first of all, I'll outline the application, and then there is a matter that the panel are going to have to consider before we move on for you to consider the application in full. But I'll outline that issue once I've outlined the application. So, as you're aware, this is an application for the grant of a premises licence for the premises known as Dubai Stores, 1 to 3 Willow Lane, Hill House, Huddersfield. The applicant, Ms. Varga, has applied for the consumption of alcohol off the premises 7 days a week from 800 hours in the morning until 2300 hours in the evening. In total, within the timescales of the consultation, one representation was received, and the representation considers that the following licensing objectives would not be met if the licence was granted, and they relate to public nuisance, prevention of crime and disorder, and a copy of the representation could be found at Appendix B. Coming to your decision, members will have to have regard to the Council's licensing policy, the relevant sections of which are included in the report, and you will also have to have regard to the Secretary of State's guidance, the relevant sections of which are Appendix C. That outlines the application. I'll just turn to the issue around representations. As a result of a mistake within the licensing section, under normal circumstances, ward councillors would be notified of applications that have come in. On this case, the ward councillors were not notified by the officer, and as a result, they were unaware of the application, and it only came to their attention after the close of the consultation period. Following the close of the consultation period, all 3 ward councillors submitted objections to the application, and I've discussed those objections with the applicant's representative, Mr. Nick Semper, and there is case law that suggests that those representations, albeit they are late, may be admitted to the hearing so that the council, so that yourselves as the panel have all relevant information before you. However, that's a decision for yourself as the panel as to whether you accept those representations and whether you introduce them. And it's a matter for you to consider. In addition to that, which Mr. Semper isn't aware of, late on Friday, we also received 2 further objections from members of the public, seeking that their objections be admitted at a late stage. Now, the difference between the public representations that come into a late stage and the one for the councillors is that the members of the public were consulted correctly. So notices were placed in at the premises, and a notice was placed in the local newspaper. So the public will have been made aware of that application coming in. So it's a matter for yourselves whether you accept the councillor objections and not accept the public ones, or as whether you accept all of those representations. And members will need to consider that before progressing any further with the hearing. And it may be that you speak to Mr. Semper on behalf of the applicant as to whether he is happy for those objections to come in or whether he objects to those.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to consider there. I think I'd like some advice, please, from the legal officer on how best to proceed.
Sorry, just unmuting myself. I'm not used to this. Do you think, are you happy for us to have this conversation in front of all participants, or do you think we need to have a more private conversation?
I'm happy to have it here. My colleagues, have you got any comments? You happy to do it here, or would you like to do it privately?
I'm happy to have it here.
I'm happy here.
Yeah.
Councillor Davies?
Yeah, I'm happy here.
Well,
I'm sorry.
well, my
Hello. I'm sorry to interrupt. It's Nick Semper here. As concerns the councillors' representations, clearly the councillors should be heard, and we have no objection to the councillors' representations whatsoever. However, the 2 late ones from members of the public, I haven't seen them, and actually it would be probably unfair for us to proceed on that basis, because we have no knowledge of what they are and what they contain, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask the legal officer for some advice?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think Mr. Semper's sort of made the appropriate point. He is aware, or was prior to today aware, of the views of the ward councillors, and has already suggested that he doesn't object to their views being heard. But clearly, we're in a situation where we've got some further objections, which I haven't seen. Have you seen? You obviously came in quite late, and certainly the applicant won't have seen those. So unless they're identical to the ones that have already been made, then it probably would be unfair to suddenly produce new and different objections that Mr. Semper won't have had the chance to take instructions on, or to formulate a response to. But as I say, I think as Mr. Williams pointed out, it is a matter for yourselves, but I think you should take into account the representations that have been made by Mr. Semper.
Thank you. In my view, I agree with Mr. Samper. I think it's right and proper for ward councillors to be here and to make representations. In relation to members of the public, I think they've had ample opportunity to respond to the consultation, and I think it would be unfair to allow it to be introduced now. I also think it would be quite inconvenient in light of this meeting itself being webcast. We haven't seen it, Mr. Samper hasn't seen it, and we'll need an opportunity to consider it. So for those reasons, I don't think we should consider the new ones. Councillor Allison, have you got any comments to make?
No, I agree with you, Amanda.
Councillor Davies?
I'm in agreement as well.
Thank you. So we'll proceed as we are now.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. What I will do then is, because yourselves, as the panel, haven't seen the representations from the councillors yet, I will forward those on to you now in an email so that you've got them and you can have a look at them. And obviously, Councillor Patterson is present, and Councillor Patterson can expand on those objections when it's appropriate.
Thank you. Russell, have you finished with your submissions?
I have, yes.
Right, okay. So we have some questions. I've got some questions. Because of the forum that we're in, it's quite difficult to, to make sure that everything is done fair and right. So what I'm suggesting is that I will ask my colleagues if they've got any questions one by one, and then I will ask if other people have got questions. I'm conscious that some people are on the telephone, so it's important to get around to them if they also have questions to ask. So if you just bear with me a moment, something just popped up on my screen. Okay. So I'll start with my question. So Russell, are you aware of any new or existing businesses near to where these premises are going to be?
I believe there is a shop nearby, and then there are shops located on Bradford Road as well, which isn't too far from the premises.
Right, okay. Because I am familiar with these premises and where it's located. So there's a shop on the corner on Bradford Road, isn't there?
There is, yes.
Yeah, which is very, very close by.
Yes, it is.
A stone throw away?
Yes,
okay.
But there is no community impact policy in place, so the prevalence of premises in the area isn't a factor that you can take into account.
Okay, but I'm interested to know a little bit more about these premises and how they conduct their business and how it might impact on this.
Okay,
if the business was to open.
How they conduct their businesses isn't really relevant to this application. You're considering this application on its own individual merits, based on the operating schedule that's been submitted and any relevant representations that have come in.
Okay, so can I ask you, do you know anything about the business itself? Is it new or is it existing?
I'm not certain. I think Mr. Semper's probably the best person to ask as to how long the business has been trading and under what guise it's been trading.
Okay. Do we have any representations from the police?
We don't, no.
Okay. Do we have any details about crime statistics in the area?
We don't personally, because of the police haven't submitted any representations. Mr. Semper has sent in additional information which has been circulated, which has come from West Yorkshire Police's public portal for crime statistics, and I understand that they show some crime, but to what extent I can't say. That will be for Mr. Semper to put that into context in his presentation.
Right, okay. So going back to other businesses in the area, are there similar businesses in the area? And do you know their licensing conditions?
Yeah, they are similar businesses. I would have to have a look at what their licensing hours are. I can do that while Mr. Semper's, or while we're moving through, and I can provide those later on in the hearing.
Right, okay. Just bear with me a second. Mr. Semper's provided a road traffic collision data report about road traffic incidents in the area. Do you have any comments on those? There's information about casualties, but I wanted to know whether any of these casualties were fatalities. Do you have any details on that?
We don't have any further details on that. It's like I said, the police haven't submitted any objections to it. We don't consult with our colleagues in highways. They're not a responsible authority, so I couldn't say whether those crashes or accidents involved any fatalities or not.
Okay, thank you. So if I can ask my colleagues then, I'll start with Councillor Allison. Do you have any questions? You're on mute, Councillor Allison.
Sorry. No, not at this time. You've asked something that I was thinking about, so thank you at this time, but no.
Thank you, Councillor Davies.
No, you again. You've asked the questions I wanted to know about the business as well.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask if anyone else has got any questions. So I will start with the applicant and the applicant's representative, Mr. Semper. Do you have any questions at this stage?
No, no, ma'am. Simply that I will be addressing you on crime and accident statistics in the area. And just to confirm, none of the accidents on the data that I produced are what we call KSIs, killed or serious injury ones. They are all slight. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Miss Gilmore, do you have anything to ask at this stage?
Just basically why we need another off licence when we've got a 24-hour one. I've lived on this street over 20 years and the traffic is the double parked already as it is.
Okay. Russell, are you able to answer?
Yeah.
You able to respond?
Parking issues are not something that the Licensing Act can take into account. So when considering this application, parking doesn't fall within the panel's remit. That's more of a planning issue. And like I said, there is no community impact policy in place. So the fact that there are another premises in that area is not something the panel can take into account. It's for the business owner. If he feels that there is a need and can operate that business, then that's a matter for them rather than the panel. And Chair, I've just been notified that Firetown News, like Ms Gilmore has just said, is 24-hour operation.
Councillor Patterson, I know you're going to make representations a little bit later on, but do you have any questions for Russell?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I will be making representation later on, but just one question at the moment for Russell, which is I am most surprised that the police haven't put in any comment, and I just wondered if he had any understanding as to why that might be.
Yeah, having spoken to the police licensing officer, they looked at the application and they considered the application and they didn't feel that they had sufficient grounds to submit any representations against the application coming in.
Okay, thank you.
That's useful. Thank you, Russell. Right, okay, so let's move on to the applicant then. Mr. Samper, you're making representations on behalf of the applicant?
I most certainly am, ma'am. Okay, well, this is a very modest application. It's been well explained by Russell Williams and requires little further explanation, frankly. Now, Councillors Ulla, Sokol and Patterson have made late representations, which we're pleased to hear. The first is helpfully bulleted. The second echoes the first, but adds a further dimension of prostitution. And the third simply concurs, but provides no new evidence. Now, consequently, I will deal with all three together. But first, I must preface my submission with the dictum of the Thwaites case. This is a Queen's Bench division case and therefore sets legally binding precedents. Now, your lawyer will know all about it, but I can give the citation if required. But during that case, the Honourable Mrs. Justice Black stated in her judgment at para 40 that licensing authorities such as yourselves should therefore ensure that any conditions they impose are only those which are necessary for the promotional licensing objectives, which means they must go no further than what is needed for that purpose. At para 46, she states, it is fair to conclude in the circumstances that they, the panel in that particular case, proceeded upon the basis that there was no reliable evidence of actual problems linked to the premises. At para 63, she stated, this is her words, not mine, the fact that the police did not object should have weighed very heavily upon them, the panel. And at para 63, she continues, the panel proceeded without proper evidence and gave their own views excessive weight, and their resulting decision limited the operation of the premises without it having been established that it was necessary to do so in order to promote the licensing objectives. She concluded that in all the circumstances, their decision was unlawful and it must be quashed. Okay, now those are all quotes from that particular case, and I must therefore, and with the utmost respect, impress upon the panel to only be actuated by reliable, i.e. real evidence of actual problems put before you today. So dealing with each element in turn, and I quote from, I believe, Councillor Uller, the shop is situated in a part of the ward that has existing antisocial behaviour, drug and alcohol misuse issues, adding to potentially further crime disorder. Well, as you correctly identified before, the lead agency for the prevention of crime and disorder licensing objective are the police. They are statutorily and duty bound to object to this application if they believe that to grant it would create or add to crime and disorder problems in the area. They are not here, and there's a good reason for that. They simply do not object to it. Perhaps I can demonstrate the reasons why. I have served on the panel the figures obtained from the UK crime mapper system provided by the Home Office, which in turn come from the South Yorkshire Police. The 6 months provided are the most up-to-date crime and antisocial behaviour figures available. You will see on the plan, the mapping system geolocates incidents to a physical position very near to the applicant's shop. Now in May, there was one crime of damage and no antisocial behaviour incidents. In April, there was one violent or sexual crime, that's a category, violent sexual, and no ASB incidents reported. In March, there was one case of theft and no ASB incidents reported. In February, there was no crime or ASB reported whatsoever. In January, there were 2 crimes of damage and 2 violent sexual offences and 1 ASB incident. And December, there was 1 incident of damage and 3 violent or sexual offences and no ASB incidents reported. Okay, this equates to an average of 1 crime every fortnight and 1 ASB incident every 6 months. These figures also fail to delineate which offences occurred in private, i.e. in private houses, and which within the public space, and lastly fail to tell us which incidents have been flagged with an alcohol marker, which is required by the Home Office. Okay, crimes and ASB that are committed with people who are under the influence of alcohol must be flagged, marked on that system. So certainly not all of those crimes that and ASB incidents that I've told you about will be alcohol related, and many of them will have occurred within private property. An assault, for example, may well have occurred outside the influence of alcohol and in private property and have no relevance whatsoever to this hearing today. But I bring you back to the averages. It's 1 crime every fortnight and 1 ASB incident reported every 6 months. In short, members of the panel, these are remarkably low crime figures for which this community can feel justly proud. Moreover, speculation to the potential of what may or may not happen should you grant the small outlet a premises licence is not permitted under the Thwaites ruling. Lastly, as a postscript, I am reassured to hear that the police, whom I have visited and discussed this application with twice, have indeed checked this premises out, in that they have conducted an undercover test purchase operation and have inspected it overtly and found all to be very much in order. Okay, the next objection suggests that and I quote again, allowing another licensed premises will increase and add further intensification to the area and add possible public nuisance. I'm sorry, but as Russ has already explained, this form of, and your lawyer, sorry, Mr. Stickley, this form of objection is only permitted under the legislation where a licensing authority such as yourself imposes a cumulative impact policy. This mechanism was first put on the statute book by the Policing and Crime Act of 2017, and with it comes a prescribed legal framework whereby a licensing authority can impose such a serious restraint on trade and private property. This is all covered in the Act and in Chapter 14 of the statutory guidance. If you look it up, you'll find it between paras 1420 and 1448. You'll see again that the representation speculates that the grant might add to possible public nuisance. Put it more accurately, the author actually means possibly add to public nuisance, because you can't add impossible public nuisance, but that's semantics. Again, they are trying to introduce speculation as evidence here, and that is simply not permissible for the reasons I've already stated. Lastly, may I also refer to para 2.21. I know Mr. Stickle will be making notes of all this. Para 2.21 of the statutory guidance, and I'll quote it to you word for word. It says, beyond the immediate area surrounding the premises, these are matters for the personal responsibilities of individuals.
We lost you there, Mr. Semper.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello, we lost you there.
Okay. How much did you miss?
Again?
I read the para 2.21. It will be before you. Your lawyer will show it to you. But what it says is, beyond the immediate area surrounding the premises, these are matters for the personal responsibility of individuals under the law. An individual who engages in antisocial behaviour is accountable in their own right. Therefore, Tamara, the applicant, cannot be held responsible for things outside her control, past, present, or future. Okay, the third objection is actually a close relative of the second, in that there are other licensed establishments within close proximity, e.g. a 24-hour shop in Bradford Road. Again, the Act specifically does away with the no need for another argument at para 14.19 of the statutory guidance, and provides the mechanism to address saturation through the adoption of a cumulative impact policy by the licensing authority. This is something that the licensing authority has yet to do, if at all, and therefore this cannot be allowed to stand as a valid objection. Now, the fourth objection explains that the shop is situated on a dangerous corner with highway safety issues, with increased traffic and footfall during peak times. That again is a quote from the Good Counsellor's submission. Now, as you've already been told by Russell and Mr. Stickley, road safety is primarily a matter for Public Highways England and the Road Safety Unit of Kirklees Council, neither of whom are here today to make representations, not necessarily as a responsible authority, but as an interested party. Okay, such matters are not the remit of the licensing subcommittee. However, I fear that may come over as a weak answer. So instead, I will ask you to look at the road traffic collision data that is freely available at www.crashmap.co.uk, which harvests only the data from the Department of Transport, who themselves collect the data, accident stats, from the police. I commend it to you all as a very useful tool. Now, I've interrogated this database and sent you the results, and find that there has not been an accident recorded at this location since 2018. In 2018, there were 3 collisions, all slight injury, and none were KSI, so killed or serious injuries. Therefore, you may not be entirely persuaded by the argument that this is actually a multi-accident cluster site, and therefore you may not be convinced that were this premises license to be granted, this alleged or unproven pre-existing multi-accident cluster site would claim any more victims. But I will finish where I started on this point. This is not the remit of the licensing subcommittee, and none of this process today would alter the fact that there are already shops at this location. The only way you can alter that is to compulsorily purchase them and then close them. But we are here merely to discuss the sale of alcohol by retail. Now, the fifth objection is around prostitution in the area. You will all know that prostitution is not unlawful in the UK, but certain aspects associated with it are. I fail to see the link between this application, this very modest application, to sell alcohol by retail from this very small shop, and prostitution. If you can explain the causal link between the two, then I can address you further on the matter. But at the moment, I am more than a little perplexed. Now, we have before us a representation from a member of the public, Mrs. Gilmore, who observes that there is already a 24-hour off licence nearby. Again, and with the greatest respect, this form of objection is specifically excluded under para 14.19 of the statutory guidance. But I would just ask you to hold that thought for a minute, because what this good Mrs. Gilmore is, and the councillors are actually complaining about, is the antisocial behaviour generated by the pre-existing 24-hour off licence. These are all good people, and they deserve to have their concerns heard and their legitimate issues addressed. The consequence cannot be that this young lady is denied the facility of being allowed a premises licence, which she is perfectly entitled to in my submission. The proper remedy for this perceived problem, and I don't question the motivations of Mrs. Gilmore or any of the councillors, okay? But the proper remedy is that the perpetrators of any pre-existing ASB issues should be brought up short. If these papers are to be believed, and I think they can, I think they certainly warrant further action at the very least than there is to address the issue that is being raised here. But denying this young lady her premises licence will not address any pre-existing problem incidentally. If anything, it will only serve to concentrate it all on the one pre-existing ASB hotspot. Now, a few of you may know that prior to me becoming a licensing consultant, I was actually a local policing lead for a city in the West Midlands. In my opinion, this location clearly warrants inclusion on a patrol plan in order to give it the attention that it deserves. If an increased level of police engagement does not rectify the situation, then the police and the local authority can go for a public spaces protection order. And this panel knows only too well the procedures around calling for a review of the premises licence of this neighbouring 24-hour operation. You should not, with the greatest respect, be persuaded to penalise this young lady who has never sold a single drop of alcohol to anyone for the failings of another elsewhere and entirely beyond her control. You have not heard one word of evidence against her or her little business. You cannot therefore fail to see in my submission that to refuse her on the grounds of the failings of another could not be right or indeed lawful. And so I conclude my presentation by urging you to grant this modest licence in the form that it has been applied for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Semper. I have a few questions. So this business, is it already in operation, or is it a new business?
It's already in operation. It's a fairly new business. It's new to Tamara, but it's already in operation. I was there only last week. It's a lovely little shop, a little corner shop, much the type much famed and favoured in Yorkshire.
Okay. And what items is she selling there at the moment?
sorry, ma'am, you just broke up there. Can you?
I'm just interested to know what items she's selling there at the moment. What sort of goods is she selling? Is it a grocery shop, or what sort of business is it?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's what's termed a convenience store, ma'am.
Okay. Just bear with me a second. I've listened to your submissions and you've made some very strong points, which I've got to agree with. But my concerns around when you made submissions about saturation, that, you know, there are other shops in the area, but, you know, we have to be mindful and look at this as an individual entity. My concerns are there is a shop literally 2 steps away from these premises, which has a history. I mean, I appreciate that the police haven't made submissions, but there is a negative history that I'm aware of. And just to put you in the picture, we have considered other businesses nearby, other applications for businesses to open nearby. So we have considered as a panel issues around that shop, the one that I'm referring to on Bradford Road. So we are familiar with some of the issues that have come to light. So based on that, it's very difficult to ignore things that we have been made aware of by the police. Although they haven't made representations today, we're aware that there have been issues and recent issues. Admittedly, there may not be, you know, information in the data that you've provided, but we have been made aware of issues. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, ma'am. I would refer you back to what your own legal advisor has said, and also what the statutory guidance says under para 2.21 and what have you. You have no cumulative impact policy, and therefore saturation is not something you can address your mind to. Now, look, I'm not a silly man. You know, I'm not insensible to what you are saying, and you're saying, I think, and bearing in mind we're in public, that the issues are very clear, and they lie next door. Ma'am, you need to address those issues with next door and not penalise this young lady in my submission, and with the utmost respect.
I've got no more questions for now. I'll find out if my colleague has any. Councillor Allison, any questions?
Nothing from me, no.
And Councillor Davies, any questions? You're on mute, Councillor Davies. No question.
Sorry,
okay.
no question.
Thank you. So I will move to Miss Gilmore. Do you have any questions?
I've just been listening, and as I live here, I see it every day. But since it has opened, the amount of traffic, people hanging about, the noise, and that's before they sell alcohol. Now, as everyone knows, when alcohol's in the mixture, people get louder, noisier. It doesn't bring the most festive people. And if they're already hanging out, like loitering, meeting up, socialising outside the shop now, what's it going to be like once they start selling alcohol?
Thank you, Miss Gilmore. Mr. Semper, can you answer that?
Yes. Yes, I can. But it's difficult to put this into words that don't dismiss this lady's genuine concerns. Can I refer you back to what I said before? If there are issues there, that is a job for your local policing commander. You make that an ASB patrol hotspot, and you do that by regular visits, you do that by engaging, educating, and then lastly, enforcing. And if all that fails, then you move on to what's called a public spaces protection order, which the good council of Kirklees knows all about. Okay, those are the remedies for an antisocial behaviour problem in an area which are provided by the legislation. It's all in the Policing and Crime Act of 2017. I've brought in cumulative impact policies and public spaces protection orders myself in an earlier role to deal with these things, but I see them very much as a failure, frankly. When I turn up and as a policing commander and explain to people what I am prepared to accept and what I'm not prepared to accept, 99 times out of 100, they totally get it. And officer presence, education and engagement usually does it. Only in the last resort do you move to enforcement. Okay, so that's my take on that. Mrs. Gilmore, look, I want to impress upon you. I understand what you're saying, and I'm not denigrating it in any way, but actually denying this young lady of the ability to sell a little bit of alcohol in her shop, not 24 hours, is not significantly going to change the dynamic on your pre-existing concerns for the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Semper. Councillor Patterson, have you got any questions?
Yes, I've just got the one. And to ask Mr. Semper, can he really honestly believe that the community should be, and I quote him, justly proud of a crime rate of 1 a fortnight, knowing that not all crime is actually reported, but 1 a fortnight? I don't think I would be proud if that was my street. That's all. It's a comment, I suppose, rather. I don't really expect Mr. Semper to respond to that.
Are you able to respond, Mr. Semper?
I can respond. Yes, certainly I can respond to that. Yes, I've been a local policing lead for large conurbations, and if I was running at a reported crime rate of 1 a fortnight, I would be justly proud of that. Yes, I would. Okay, both in private and in public. It is very difficult to police people's front rooms and police their internet activities and what have you. And frankly, those are remarkably low figures. Now, the second thing you touch upon, Councillor Patterson, is underreporting. You suggest underreporting. Well, that's a little bit like knitting fog. Sorry, that sounds dismissive, right? I recognise that underreporting could be an issue. And there are things that your local policing commander will do around that. And that can be third-party reporting at citizens' advice or local doctor surgeries or local schools. I've done a lot of that because people don't necessarily want to walk into a police station for whatever reason. That's a good way of taking the temperature of an area. Also, anonymous reporting via your local ward councillors. That proves very useful as well, because again, the local councillors are the eyes and ears in any community and have a valuable role in advising the police on what policing priorities should be. Now, I've actually been through the policing priorities on the Huddersfield local policing site, and they have not got this particular area flagged as a policing priority. Now, as the local ward councillor, man, you might want to take a view on that. And I don't criticise the police; that would be a terrible mistake. But you know, frankly, they're not here because there are no grounds for them to be here. They do not object because referring you back to the judgment in the Thwaites case, they have to be actuated by real evidence of actual problems. I suppose you could call it actual evidence of real problems. And frankly, on the stats, man, that's just not supported. But thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Can
Semper.
I just add that, sorry, Miss Gilmore again here. Can I just add that I did ring the police, and on 2 occasions the police, which I'm not knocking the police for it, but they did say that they were too busy to come out.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay, so let's move on then. So, Ms. Gilmore?
Hi.
Hello, hi. As the first objector, can I ask you to make representations, please?
Do you want?
So why are you objecting to the application?
So my objections is 1, noise, 2, with the parking, disturbance on the street, the gathering, the social gathering that they're doing, you know, nuisance. I feel it's unsafe. You know, I always like to be home early because the later it gets, the more congregation of crowds is there. Hello?
Hello. Any more reasons? Any more objections? Can you hear me, Miss Gilmore?
Yeah, I can. I'm not sure if you could hear me.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, just basically that the shop is already a meeting point, and I'm just worried it's going to become a bigger problem. Nuisance, noise, parking, and just unsafety, really, the type of crowds it brings. And we already have literally one. It's 2 shops away that already sell alcohol 24 hours a day.
Okay, have you finished?
Yeah.
Lovely. Okay, so we've got a few questions for you. So I've got a question. I want to ask about the situation right now, rather than.
Hello, sorry.
Sorry. I apologise. I was on mute. I've got to remember what I said now. So you've said you've talked about. Yes, I want to ask you about the situation now, rather than how we think it might develop in the future. Okay. And you talked about social gatherings. So you talked about the shop being open, and there are social gatherings at the moment, and you say it's a nuisance. Am I right? Is that what you said? There's a nuisance outside the shop. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? So, are there certain times of the week where people are gathering, or how many people are gathering? Could you describe them?
So,
what time of the day?
It can be all different times of the day. A sunny day is the worst. I know people gather more in the sun, but it's just, like one will come, or, and we can hear them because they park outside my house because the parking is just terrible. The residents park on the left side, but then people wanting to go to the shop are parking on the right side. And then it's like, oh, I'm outside to buy stores, and one's then come in their car, and they're either on the street, outside the shop, or in the cars. It's not like they're just going, buying something and driving away. It's like it's more of a meeting point rather than just going in, nipping into the shop for a loaf of bread, say.
Okay. And when you said noise nuisance, what sort of nuisance are they causing?
Just loud talking and loud shouting. Cars running, music coming out of the cars. Just like a gathering point.
Okay, that's it. That's it for me for now. I'll find out if any of my colleagues have got any questions. Councillor Allison?
No, you've already asked about the gathering and the kind of nuisance noise. So thank you.
Councillor Davies?
Can I just explore the nuisance and the timings of the nuisance? I know that you're saying that, Ms Gilmore, you're saying it's currently, but in the current situation we're in regarding lockdown and whatever, if the shop's been open a while, are people meeting there now because they have nowhere else to go? Were they meeting there sort of before Christmas, before January, that sort of thing? I'm just trying to explore whether it's a general meeting place in normal circumstances, or whether it's become a meeting place in lieu of anywhere else for people to go.
Yeah, so since lockdown, really, that's when it's become a bigger problem.
Okay, so people weren't gathering there or hanging out there before lockdown?
I can't say I noticed, to be honest.
Okay, thank you very much.
So I will move to Mr. Semper. Have you got any questions?
I've got some observations of that, if I'm permitted.
It's more questions really. It's Mr. Semper. It's questions really that I'd like you to put to the objector. You've had an opportunity to make representations and comments, and you can sum up later on. So if you've got any specific questions of the objector, could you ask those, please?
Okay. All right. All right. No, I tell you what, we'll just prolong it. And like I say, I've not come here to fall out with people. I've just come here to explain the law. So we'll do that in a minute. Okay. Thank you.
I'm grateful. Councillor Patterson, are there any questions that you have?
To Miss Gilmore, Mrs. Gilmore, yeah, just one. I think she did say earlier that people were parking on double yellow lines. Are they actually parking on the? I was just asking. I'd like to ask about that parking. Are they parking on the pavement over the double yellow lines, or are they actually sticking parking in the road itself?
No, on the double yellow lines.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A lot of the normal road is taken up by the residents' cars. So people wanting to go to the shop or meet outside the shop, obviously there's no room on the normal roads for the parking, you know, like on the curb and again on the double yellow lines.
Thank you. Okay, so Councillor Patterson, you're next. Could you make some representations?
Yes, thank you. I'm not quite sure where to start, to be honest, but I will say I will start with the crime in the area. I would not accept, and I've seen lots of crime figures as a ward councillor, a crime every fortnight as being a good rate of crime. The police are well aware of this particular area. It is part of an intensive engagement area. We also, as a council, have got what we call the Hill House Project, where we've got all services working together to deal with all the issues that there are in the area, many of which are or which include drug dealing, prostitution, excessive use of alcohol and crime and disorder. So certainly the police are well aware of all the issues and are actually doing something about it. And if the crime figures for the last couple of months are better than they have been previously, then that obviously shows that some of the work that they're doing in the area is actually working. I think anybody who lives in Huddersfield be well aware of a crime that was committed in the area to do with the 24-hour shop, I must admit, on Bradford Road, whereby 2 people were shot. A couple of cars were involved, which drove onto the pavement and drove off at speed down the road where Willow Lane, where the Dubai Stores is situated. My worry in terms of the crime and disorder is yes, we can't assume that Mr. Tamara will attract or will not run her shop properly. But what I fear is going to happen, the shops on Bradford Road are well known for their because they do attract the drug dealers and the prostitutes, especially of an evening. What's going to happen, because the Dubai Stores is almost right behind these stores on Bradford Road, because that corner is not a right angle corner. It's a very sharp left turn behind Bradford Road. All those people that are currently causing antisocial behaviour and at the 24-hour shop will go round the back, where they can't be seen so easily by the passing patrol cars, etc., etc. There is plenty of reason to assume that antisocial behaviour and crime will take place in that area, and more so if they can get out of public view behind the corner, behind that shop on Bradford Road. And because, again, of the nature of that junction of 5 roads, again, I don't know, I haven't recently looked at the figures for accidents there, but I am sure they will be increased by more cars parking up at Dubai Stores, the cars coming across from Willow Lane, across to Willow Lane East, or the other way around, whichever it is, and suddenly coming across a parked car, which shouldn't be there anyway because it's on double yellow lines, having to move out of the way and hitting another oncoming car. It's a very busy junction. I mean, that's why there's traffic lights there. Most of the accidents, I believe, have actually been, involved a pedestrian in the past, and they haven't been minor injuries. I mean, there's been some very serious injuries on that corner, and they can only be made worse by more cars parking up to go to the Dubai stores who are perhaps, because what happens at the moment is cars are parking on the pavement on Bradford Road. But if they can get round the back, they will do so. We've also, I mean, I know it's not a licensing issue, but there's a huge problem with fly tipping just by Dubai stores. To be honest, I do not understand why perhaps Mr. Mara would like to run this shop, but there's a huge problem with fly tipping, which again will only be increased by people coming out of the store with alcohol in packs of whatever it is, dumping the cardboard there or the empty bottles or whatever they might do. I'm sure the noise from the cars, the music played is a nuisance to local residents. And I am truly worried about the increase in crime and that could be caused by this shop. Now, I do reckon by giving this shop a license, that is. Now, I do recognise that you can't presume that Mr. Tamara is going to run a bad establishment. But having looked at her application, there's very little in it other than providing CCTV that will mitigate any potential future problems of crime. I think I would like to see a bit more there about in terms of training or panic buttons or all sorts of things that might be needed. But again, as Mr. Semper has said, we can't just assume that her establishment will be a nuisance. But I think her customers will. And if anything, in the worst case, in terms of the outcome of your decision making, I would like to. Obviously, I would like to see the license not granted. But if you feel unable to do that, I certainly feel that perhaps you could give a temporary license for a period of 6 months or 12 months, because lockdown is not the best time anyway. Even though we've just come out of, well, potentially just come out of lockdown, to judge these things. So. Yeah, I know you have recently, in the last 12 months, looked at other licenses in the area, and there have been some curtailment of what they were asking for given onto those particular premises. And I've also noticed that they're now actually putting in for a change of use. So I'm not quite sure what happened there, but I really feel that this additional license will only add to the problems in that particular area and will not detract from them. And it may not be Mr. Mara's fault, but certainly she will find them at her door, I think, and if this license is granted. I'm just think I've mentioned everything I wanted to. I mean, just say again, the police are there all the time. There is a local police officer who knows the area very, very well. The police have asked even for the telephone box to be taken away because that's where drug dealers are using that telephone box to take orders from. People ring that telephone box and orders are taken from there. So don't tell me there's no crime in the area or the police are not doing anything or they don't know anything about it, because they do. I think, I think that's all I need to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Russell, you've indicated that you want to come in. I wasn't sure.
Sorry, Chair. That was a mistake on my part. Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any questions for Councillor Patterson.
No.
Councillor Davies, no.
No, not from me, no.
Okay. Mr. Semper, do you have any questions for Councillor Patterson?
No, ma'am. I think I can address the issues that she's raised adequately, summing up. Thank you.
Okay. And Miss Gilmore, have you got any questions for Councillor Patterson?
No, I just agree with exactly everything that she said.
Okay, thank you. Right, so we're coming to the close of the proceedings. So if the parties would like to sum up, if you can just bear with me a second. Okay, so Russell, would you like to sum up?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Nothing much to add really, other than a reminder that the proliferation of premises, parking, suitability of location are not relevant considerations for the panel. As difficult as it may be in that area, it's not something that the panel can take into account. That's more of a planning issue and an issue for other teams within the council. There's also not an option to grant a licence for a time-limited period. You either grant the application, grant with appropriate and necessary conditions, exclude licensable activities or amend what's been applied for, or you can reject the application, and that this case has to be decided on its own individual merits. That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Russell. Mr. Semper, would you like to sum up?
Yes, ma'am. Again, I don't criticise the representatives in speculating as what they believe will happen, but I'm afraid speculation is not a relevant consideration in these proceedings. Now, we've heard stories about double yellow lines and parking. Again, I'm afraid that is irrelevant to these proceedings. We've heard representations about gatherings. Now, we live in a free country and people can gather. If their behaviours are causing antisocial behaviour, I've explained at length the statutory and the practical and tactical means by which those are addressed. We've talked a little bit about lockdown and how we hadn't started to notice there was a problem prior to lockdown. Well, we're coming out of lockdown, folks, and people can gather in their usual gathering places. I know we're far from seeing the back of this terrible COVID-19, but frankly, if it's a lockdown issue, that in itself is time limited. Now, we've heard about the crime in the area, and I'm reassured that Inspector James Kitchen is all over it, and I'm really pleased to hear that the work along with the councillors is bearing fruit. But again, I've got to hit you with para 63 of Mrs. Justice Black's ruling judgment in the Thwaites case, and her words, not mine. The fact that the police did not object should have weighed very heavily upon them, i.e. the panel. Okay, they are statutorily and duty bound to raise crime and disorder issues at this hearing. Okay, and they haven't, and I've explained the reason for that. There is no real evidence, reliable evidence of actual problems. Now, we've also heard about two people shot next door and some driving on the pavement. Again, shocking behaviours, nothing to do with Tamara, nothing to do with his premises, nothing to do with his application. Okay, if there are problems next door, you are all, as a licensing panel and as councillors, aware of the mechanism whereby you, in your own right, can call a review of that premises and curtail the hours and behaviours and facility and amenity surrounding that next door premises. And it is what's going on in the next door premises, because there is no cumulative impact policy in place. That again, I'm afraid, is irrelevant and excluded. Now, the good councillor spoke, and I've written down what she's been saying, but it'll be on the record. She has speculated as what's going to happen, and she's explained that there are plenty of reasons to assume what will happen. Again, speculation and assumption, I'm afraid, lie outside your decision making. In my submission. Okay, she's explained about the serious accidents down on the junction. All I can tell you is I lay the crash map as evidence before you. There has not been an accident there since 2018. There were three in 2018, all slight, all involving vehicles, seemingly not pedestrian injury accidents that have been recorded by the Department of Transport or the police at that location. And lastly, Russell's absolutely right, there's no provision for a temporary licence. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So the panel needed an opportunity to consider the information that we've heard. so we can come to a decision about the application itself. So there'll be a breakout session where we go and consider away from the general public, away from the public webcast. So I'll just wait for my colleague to set that up, and then when we have come to a decision, we will convene.
Councillor Pinnock, you're on mute.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the licence panel hearing in respect of an application for grant of premises licence for Dubai stores situated at 1 to 3 Willow Lane, Hill House, Huddersfield. The panel have had an opportunity to consider the application and to consider the evidence that's been given today. And we have also considered the licensing objectives in relation to public safety, prevention of crime and disorder, prevention of public nuisance and protection of children from harm. After considering the information, we're minded to grant the licence as requested. However, we know there's been a checkered history, particularly in that area. And since I've been chair of licensing, I've been made aware of a number of antisocial behaviour issues that have taken place. So we do generally have concerns. But what we expect is that the licensing department keep a very close eye on what takes place in the area. And if there are any issues, if there are reports from members of the public and so on, then there are procedures and measures available to the police and licensing team in terms of a review of that license. So, I just want and that's an end to the proceedings. Thank you, everyone, for attending the meeting. Have a nice afternoon.
Well, thank you very much indeed, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.